Wester Ross, where the rugged mountains of the Northwest Highlands meet the Atlantic. In this stunning landscape, water is everywhere, connecting communities by river, by sea and by loch. Lochs are the jewels of the Scottish landscape, and to appreciate them better, I'm on a loch-hopping journey across Scotland, exploring the long fjord-like sea lochs of the northwest, crossing the great freshwater lochs of the Highlands, and discovering the secrets of the many lochans that stud the open countryside. For this grand tour, I'm plumbing the depths of a deeply impressive canyon, catching the wind to make electricity, and climbing one of the country's most celebrated little peaks. In this programme, I'm heading to the Lochs of Wester Ross. My journey starts in the shadow of one of Scotland's most spectacular mountains, heads across Little Loch Broom to the Scorrig Peninsula, visits the Corrieshalloch Gorge, heads up Loch Broom to Ullapool, and finishes on the summit of Stack Polly. These are the rock spires and pinnacles of Anchellach, a Gaelic name which translates as the Forge. Beneath its pristine snowfields lies Little Loch Broom, which stretches from the lands of Dundonald to the Minch and the open sea. This was a traditional crofting community, a way of life that's fast becoming a fading memory. Artist Kenneth McLennan was born up the road. His recent work focuses on the Dundonald area and has been inspired by memories of his childhood and an unexpected gift. A diary written during World War II by his Aunt Rena when she was a young girl. How old was Rena when she started her diary?
Rena would be 16. She was given the diary by her sister Ella, who was my mum.
Mm-hmm. It's a tiny wee thing, isn't it?
It is quite small.
Yeah. So what kind of things did she write about? Is it everyday life?
Well, she'd be involved with all the daily chores inside the house, washing by hand, but also they had horses at that time as well, and she'd be helping people plough the fields. So she was mainly the all work that was involved in looking after a croft.
Mm-hmm. It says here, look, Wednesday the 19th, I was planting Irene's tatties today.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. On Saturday the 22nd, it says, I was planting Nancy Badcoal's tatties.
That's right.
So she was a young lassie being sort of pulled hither and thither, being told to plant other people's tatties.
Oh, it was very much down-to-earth sort of activities at that time, you know.
I was baking nearly all day.
Yes.
Right. So she was being worked hard, was your aunt. Ken was fascinated by Rena's diary. Although it was fragmentary, he fleshed out her story and produced a book with a cast of characters who once lived along the shores of Little Loch Broom. Now, you see lots of references in the diary, I've noticed, to Keelying. Can you explain that for me?
Well, that's right. That was the thing that I noticed when I read it, first of all. Every second page there's a ceilidh, and you tend to think that there's dances and music here every night, but she's using ceilidh in the old traditional sense of the word of just visiting, and ceilidh was an everyday event. Ceilidh just meant to go and see somebody, and you would drop in for a cup of tea and that, or you would just get the general news. And she's a Gaelic speaker, but she's writing in English. You would hear an awful lot of people maybe telling a story. And I remember when I was younger, you would hear a story being spoken in English, but when it would come to the main sort of punchline, they would revert to Gaelic because the punchline was better in Gaelic, and I was always left thinking, what's the punchline to that? So I think that's been my life's ambition, to find out what these punchlines were, you know. Leaving Ken to finish sketching, I head down to the jetty where there's a boat waiting for me to take me over to the other side of Little Loch Broom. I'm heading for Scorrig, an off-grid community that is entirely without a road link. To get there involves an 8-kilometre walk on a rough coastal path or a boat trip across the loch. There are about 60 full-time residents on Scorrig today,
But just over 50 years ago, the community was facing extinction. Then gradually, the remoteness of Scorig began to attract people with a variety of ideas about living differently. Among the early pioneers were a gay couple, Jack and Roy, who settled on a croft in the 1940s. Unlikely as it may seem, they ran a mail-order business selling organically grown onions and carrots to lonely lighthouse keepers. They were also the first to begin to plant trees on the peninsula, where the spirit for doing things differently continues to thrive. Alan Bevitt moved here in the 1970s and has kept body and soul together using his wits and skill as an instrument maker, turning out highly sought-after violins. I catch up with him in his workshop.
How long have you been making violins?
Well, I suppose about 60 years.
60 years?
Yes.
Right.
I made my first one when I was at school. I was also keen on science, so I wondered if I wanted to be a scientist or a violin maker.
Mm-hmm. Did you become a scientist then?
Yes, I did. So I did that until I was 35.
Doing what?
Physics, physics research in England and Australia. And so retired at the age of 35 and moved up here to become a violin maker. So this is the traditional wood, which is figured sycamore. There's only about one sycamore tree in 100 that's got this wavy grain,
Oh yes, I
which
can
makes
see that.
the wood really valuable. So the front is made traditionally of spruce. This is a wedge of a tree. So this is the tree, and so you saw it down the middle, glue the big ends together, and so you get a piece that shape, and it provides the thickness in the middle.
So we forget that a beautiful musical instrument like a violin starts off as a
starts
great
off
lump
just
of wood. It's a
it
tree,
does, yes.
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's incredible. But presumably this must be a passion for you because you've been doing it for so long.
Yes, I never get bored by it, and I've got a stove to keep me warm in the winter, music, a nice view, so I'm a happy man.
Today, Scorig supports a diverse community of people living off-grid. But life here is far from a primitive affair. The locals are famous for their ingenuity, sometimes designing and building their own homes and coming up with ingenious ways to generate power. Since the 1970s, Hugh Pigott has been designing and building low-tech wind turbines for use on Scorig and around the world.
It was quite popular in the 70s. Yeah, it was quite an exciting thing. Renewable energy in the 70s was, I think it was the oil crisis in the Middle East. And coming here, there wasn't any electricity. We were all on Tilly lamps, paraffin lamps.
Today, I'm doing my best to help Hugh with some routine maintenance on one of his turbines.
I would say my foundation is in sort of O-level physics. Is that kind of? Although I did go to university, I didn't do engineering. I did mathematics, and I would say that what stood me in most stead is going back to first principles with things. Yeah, and understanding Ohm's law and Faraday's laws and the very, very basics.
Hugh has built dozens of wind turbines on Scorig. Together with solar panels, they power most of the conveniences of modern life. But I wonder how off-grid Scorig really is when it can boast all the sophisticated comforts of the 21st century.
I came here, I suppose, looking for simplicity and a very basic way of life. And then there's been a lot of pleasure in working my way up from being amazed that cold water will come out of a tap when rather than having to go with a bucket and fetch it, up to having underfloor heating systems and Wi-Fi and all the modern conveniences. And you can't help improving things. It's just a sort of instinct. So you can try and go back to basics, but the first thing you do is to start improving and making things more complicated and making it more high-tech until in the end, you kind of come full circle.
Crossing the Scorig Peninsula, I come to Loch Broom, the big brother of Little Loch Broom. At the head of the loch, the River Broom flows from high mountains. Further upstream, it's joined by the River Droma, which runs through the Corrie Gorge, Gaelic for the Ugly Hollow. It's well over 60 metres deep in places and sometimes only 10 metres across, and has its own rare beauty. This bridge over the awesome gulf was built in 1874 and designed by Sir John Fowler, who owned the nearby estate.
Now, Sir John was a famous engineer responsible for many projects, including the world's first underground railway, London's Metropolitan line. And he was also the chief engineer on the mighty Forth Bridge, which, like this much smaller structure, is thankfully still standing. And that's a hell of a drop down there.
Most visitors to the Corrie Gorge experience it from above, but there's another angle that's worth exploring if you don't mind getting wet. To fully appreciate the profound depth of the Corrie experience, I want to see it from below. I've come down to the river that runs through the gorge, where local guide Will Copestake is leading me into the secret heart of Corrie.
When was the last time you did this, Will?
10 days ago.
Right. Was it as cold then as it is now?
Yeah, it was pretty cold.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. Ah. Swimming's quite difficult when you've got climbing boots on.
It's tricky, isn't it?
I should have brought a pair of flippers.
The Corrie was created during the Ice Age by glacial meltwater. A river beneath the ice worked away a line of weakness in the rock, forming a box canyon gorge.
Wow. What an amazing place.
Stunning, isn't it?
It really is.
It's taken almost 2 hours of wading over slippery boulders to get this far. Keeping warm isn't an option.
You can either go deep in here, a little bit deeper, or you can climb out and just accept that this is going to be quite slidey. It's fairly easy walking. I would probably prefer to stay in the water.
I don't like the slippery rocks at all.
Fantastic.
I've come to embrace the cold as my friend.
Finally, we reach Journey's End, where the beautiful Falls of Misach drop 46 metres into the River Droma, whose icy embrace has left me feeling exhausted but awestruck.
Well, it's spectacular, isn't it? It's a fantastic sight. And you know what? I think it's really been worthwhile.
I think so.
Despite the pain, despite the cold, despite the slipperiness.
It is a cold day.
Congratulations. Thank you very much for bringing me to the most remarkable place I've been to.
My pleasure.
On this whole tour.
Having peeled off my wetsuit and dried out my socks, I return to the shores of Loch Broom, where I hitch a lift on a very traditional craft, a skiff built by local man Topher Dawson. In a previous incarnation, Topher ran a boat building yard on Scorig.
So I'm guessing the idea is that we're all rowing in unison.
That would be optimal, yes.
Now, this is a four-man boat?
This is a four-man rowing boat, yes.
And fishermen would have used these boats for work and to provide themselves with fish and an income. You're using this boat for something entirely different.
Yeah.
This is apparently pleasurable.
In the past, the skills of handling an open boat also provided a ticket for local men to see the world. And in some style too. I'm intrigued to learn how from the 1870s to the 1930s, men from Loch Broom were hired by some of the wealthiest families in the world, with names like Coates, Lipton, Vanderbilt and Singer, to crew on board the finest racing yachts money could buy.
They were called the yachtsmen. They would go off for a season and return with a dark blue jersey with the name of the yacht across the front. They were beautiful yachts, but they were owned by incredibly rich men at a time when ordinary people were very, very poor. And did you know that often they didn't actually go on their yachts?
Well, I can probably believe
They
that.
watched from the shore. It was like owning a racehorse.
Really?
Yeah. Thomas Lipton, he would go out occasionally, but when they were seriously racing, he didn't usually go.
Right. So he stayed ashore and then took the glory. So the playboys of the Western world.
Yes.
Although hardly a playboy of the Western world myself, the spectacular location of Loch Broom has an invigorating effect, and we make good speed all the way to the town of Ullapool, a name which derives from the era of the Vikings.
For many years, Ullapool was a busy herring fishing port, but in the 1970s, restrictions on fishing herring were introduced to try and save the species from extinction. But what to do next? Fishermen tried desperately to find another catch and a source of income. And just when they were on the point of despair, a fishy saviour arrived. Vast shoals of mackerel appeared off the northwest coast of Scotland.
But it wasn't the Scots who had an appetite for these fish. It was communist countries of Eastern Europe. At the height of the Cold War, a Soviet fleet arrived looking to buy mackerel, and so the Klondike rush for fish began. At its peak, up to 7,000 Russians and East Europeans were anchored in the loch, more than doubling the population of Ullapool. During the boom years, John and Pat MacLeod ran a general store supplying the Klondikers.
So were they able to come ashore at all?
Oh yeah, they came ashore. They came ashore all the time. Well, they came for their provisions, but they came shopping and just... if there was some days there was no fish in the process, they'd just come ashore and wander about.
It is amazing. It's unrestricted, just wandering around.
Wander
Russians, these were the enemy. This is the Cold War.
I think when they first came, they were a bit wary of us, but we were also a bit wary of them.
Despite early suspicions, the communist visitors got on famously with the locals. Gifts were exchanged as locals and Russians got to know each other.
The Russians, they're very kind people, actually.
Did you socialise much with them?
Oh yeah, we'd just go out in the evenings for a
Saunas
meal,
mostly.
for a sauna, especially
Sauna?
to the Stahanovits, the town.
We have sauna parties or not?
Well, it's just us and our children. It was quite relaxing after a hard day work, you know, and it was a proper sauna.
A sauna and getting your back beaten with a birch.
Right. It was the full Russian makeover, was it?
It was
wow.
a full Russian
And then
sauna.
plunged into cold water.
For the best part of a decade, John and Pat did a roaring trade with the Klondike fleet and even helped Russians source second-hand Lada cars back to Russia. Having made such good friends, I want to know if they ever picked up any of the Russian language.
Cabbage, kapusta, potatoes, kartoffel.
And Petrushka.
And then Petrushka was parsley.
Petrushka?
Yes.
Petrushka.
Yes. And the only reason I can remember that is because it was so similar to my name, and they used to say,
Oh, Patricia.
Petrushka.
Right, so they're calling you parsley.
My next destination on this grand tour sticks with a fishy theme. Following what I hope won't be the usual red herring, I take a boat across Loch Kinnaird, just to the north of Ullapool, to a tiny island called Isle Martin.
Now, all my life, I've thought that red herrings are a myth, because to say that something is a red herring is to suggest that you're following a false lead of some kind. So you can imagine my amazement when I discovered that I've been wrong for all these years, because this rather strange, obnoxious and fossilized looking object is in fact a real red herring. And it links my next destination, Isle Martin, to the islands of the Caribbean, and rather disturbingly, to the slave trade.
Hopping ashore, there are no immediate clues to Isle Martin's role in this grim story. no one lives permanently on the island nowadays. But at one time, the place was a hive of industry.
I've got an old photograph here which shows an industrial scale building which once stood at the head of the old jetty. Now, it was demolished in the 1950s, but unlikely as it may seem, it was once an 18th century fish processing plant producing huge quantities of red herring.
The red herring produced on Isle Martin were exported to the Caribbean, where they were fed to African slaves on sugar plantations. To take me back to those cruel times is archaeologist Kathy Dagg. Together, we pace the floor of the old factory.
It was a massive building. It was actually 41 metres long, which takes us all the way to that tree, and 8 metres high, which is effectively 3 stories, so it towered over this building here.
So it's a real factory?
Yes. Yeah. It's an industrial building. It's the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the west coast of Scotland. The red herring differ from white herring in that they're smoked, and the smoking process is actually for about 3 weeks. Nice. So at the end of that, you have a very desiccated stick of protein that's very lightweight. You can pack it as a dry good, send it to hot climates.
And all of this was going over to the Caribbean to feed slaves on slave plantations?
Well, we're not sure of the exact proportions, but certainly the initial, the momentum for setting up the factory was slavery.
Now, the herring that were exported to the Caribbean, that became a staple diet for the slaves on the plantations. Yeah. Now, is there a legacy of that in modern cooking in the Caribbean?
Yes, if you look at Jamaican cuisine these days, there are quite a few recipes that include red herring.
Have you ever tried any?
I haven't.
Because I've got some with me, and I think we could maybe rustle up a traditional Caribbean dish.
I'm game.
In the community kitchen on Isle Martin, I endeavour to impress Kathy with my culinary skills, combining onions, tomatoes, chilli and red herring to make an unforgettable dish. The bony red herring presents something of a challenge. It's a smelly business removing the bones and gooey entrails, and I'm reminded of the origins of the expression a red herring. Apparently, red herring were used to train hounds to follow a scent.
Are you hungry, Kathy?
No.
Were you hungry? Have you lost your appetite?
It's just an amuse-bouche. So that was what one slave had the right to.
What, one
in
fish?
A day, one fish.
Oh really, just one fish?
One fish a day.
Yeah, but you see, I think we have wasted so much that they would have been appalled.
They'd have just eaten the whole thing.
I think they would have done the guts and everything. Should maybe turn it... Oh dear, that Scotch bonnet. Oh! This is a fiery dish indeed. That's the chili's getting to you.
Dear. Yeah.
It's a bit of a... Oh dear.
Can I open
This
the
is
door?
lethal. Oh. So you can see Kathy's had to retire. It's such a fiery dish. Just got a lung full of chilli, I think.
Fortunately, Kathy recovers quickly. With candles alight, it's time to plate up and test our red herring treat.
It's mouth-watering, isn't it?
Yes. It's not terrible.
That's a great compliment. Thank you very much. And who would have thought, here we are on Isle Martin, eating red herring. But that hasn't been served for a very long time.
I think probably not since about 1813.
Probably about the time when that red herring was actually caught.
Having refueled with the taste of the distant Caribbean, I recross the loch to the mainland and head north to the freshwater Loch Lurgan, which makes a watery dog's leg beneath the impressive peaks of Coyach. This is magnificent country where primeval-looking mountains rise from an ancient landscape. Between the peaks of Coolmore and Coolbeg is the extraordinary Stack Polly, which looks like a petrified beast from the age of dinosaurs. Joining me to climb to the summit is mountain guide Tim Hamlet.
Very nice.
And you've got a dog with you.
This is Kira.
Hello,
yeah.
Kira. You're going to join us.
She's going to show us the way up.
Now, it's actually quite a forbidding looking peak from here. It's like a crouching lion or maybe a primeval dinosaur-like creature cast in stone. Is there any reason why it looks like that?
Well, it's ancient Torridonian sandstone, which is 1 to 1.2 billion years old. And actually, Stack Poly is what they call a nunatak, so it would have stuck out above the ice sheet, which is why it's so frost shattered. And large chunks of it look as if they're sort of starting to fall off, really.
So it's been eroded away by time for millions of years.
At the Bialach, or the saddle, the route gets much steeper and becomes a scramble. Once on the ridge itself, the views open out to a great sweeping panorama. But to get to the best of it, serious hillwalkers have to negotiate the bad step, an awkward and exposed move over a boulder on the ridgeline that blocks access.
All right, Tim, I'm going to start climbing now, if that's okay.
When you're ready.
That's the first step on the bad step. From there. Well, it's not quite as easy as I thought it was going to be.
That is why they call it the bad step.
The bad step turned out to be not so bad after all. But having said that, I was thankful for the security of a rope, just in case. From here, it's just a few steps to the summit of one of Scotland's most dramatic wee mountains.
You can see forever up here.
Oh, it's just fabulous, and the air quality today is tremendous.
Ah, the summit cairn at last, at last. In the time-honoured fashion, I'll just give it a wee kiss. A bit gritty, but still, it has to be done. Well, this is just about as far as it's possible to go on Stack Poly, and I have to say the views are simply magnificent. But the clouds have come down a wee bit on the surrounding peaks, but looking beneath them you can see all the way to Skye in the south, and to the west you've got Harris and Lewis, and to the north the vast expanse of the Inverpoly estate dominated by the mighty peak of Solven. And I can't think of a better place to end my grand tour from Dundonald in the mist to the summit of Stack Poly.
I'm discovering a supernatural trail on my next grand tour, which takes me around the Cromarty and Dornoch Firths.
4 days, 165 miles, a steep and rocky journey uphill. Extreme Wales, Richard Parkes, Friday at 7. A young man saves a friend's life. An emotional and grateful mother. Volunteers drop everything to save lives at sea. Next.